Let's turn now to a follow-up on a story we told you about last week about new evidence that our country's biggest banks are getting bigger. A shocking announcement last week that Jpmorgan Chase had made some risky bets and lost $2 billion. Stocks plunged, and investors say now this could just be the beginning, with much more money at risk. Here's Jpmorgan CEO Jamie Dimon responding to questioning on this. His interview aired on Meet the Press over the weekend.
So we've had audit, legal, risk, compliance, some of our best people looking at all of that. We know we were sloppy. We know we were stupid. We know there was bad judgment. We don't know if any of that's true yet. Of course, regulators should look at something like this. That's their job. So, we are totally open kimono with regulators, and they will come to their own conclusions. But we intend to fix it, learn from it, and be a better company when it's done.
All right. What will the greater impact of this incident be? I want to bring in Fraad Wolff, senior analyst at Greencrest Capital. Max, let's start off with some of these remarks we just heard made by Jamie Dimon from his appearance on Meet the Press. He says regulators should look at this. But wasn't a team of lobbyists for Jpmorgan Chase who, rushed to Washington as soon as the new financial regulatory laws passed to make sure they would have wiggle room? Now he's saying, oh, they should have taken a look at this before. What's going on here?
Well, I think we see Jamie Dimon, who's been sort of market-appointed, largely self-appointed as a spokesman for why we don't need as much regulation as some voices have called for, because the best banks, Jpmorgan Chase, and the best managerial teams, Jamie Dimon's, can do business in a way that kind of nicely shepherds their organization and those dependent on it away from the biggest, most dangerous risks and pitfalls. And the problem we're seeing here is having this major $2 billion crisis on the eve of discussion about the Volcker rule come out of this best practices institution with this sort of self-appointed spokesperson for best practices, Jamie Dimon, calls into question whether it is possible to have a self-regulatory framework that works, and you have the sort of poster boy for best conduct being the party that needs to be wrapped on the knuckles, even in his own admission on the Thursday conference call, which started all this to investors, and then through Saturday and Sunday on the excerpt that you played for us a moment ago.
I guess I'm curious. What's the point of having Congress pass these laws if there are always going to be loopholes to get around them?
Part of that is the cat and mouse game between industries and industry regulators. Industry regulators do tend to find themselves in a situation where they're kind of winning the last war. So they're putting out a group of regulations designed to prevent the last financial crisis, not so much the next one. And that's still of some value, because obviously you don't want more or larger financial crises. And the bigger issue here, though, may be two things. It may be that this is the political season and that Jamie Dimon has historically been something of a Democrat, even if that relationship is somewhat rocky lately. Both parties, both the Democrats and the Republicans, need to raise money on Wall Street. Together, Romney and Obama are going to need to raise about $1.5 billion. And having some folks who are aligned to the Democratic Party, like Mr. Dimon was in many cases historically, is important, especially when Mitt Romney is kind of the Wall Street ilk and will probably do very well raising money there. So this may have political implications as well as the regulatory implications, because we start debating rules that cover just this kind of trade this week.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how you think you expect this incident to play out in the election, because a lot of people have said President Obama, throughout his entire time in the White House, has been just a little too close to Wall Street. Mitt Romney, though, of course, also good friends with Wall Street. So, how do you think, you think this will change the discussion, elevate some of the discussions about this, but do you think it has any role in shaping the election and some of the issues?
Yeah, I think we're going to see this discussed during the election cycle by the Democrats and the Republicans. I think we're also going to see this affect the rulemaking process for how to deal with how much banks are allowed to make bets on their own books as opposed to just make bets for clients, a more traditional undertaking. On the other hand, yeah, I do think this is going to have a huge political implication, because we do have one candidate who has much closer historical enterprise ties with Wall Street type operating procedures through Bain Capital, and another candidate who needs and wants and has historically gotten some money from Wall Street. But the other maybe bigger issue here is that the Obama administration has rhetorically taken a pretty hard stance on Wall Street and finance. The Republican Party a little bit less so lately because of their general aversion to greater regulation. On the other hand, every poll and every social indication we get continues to show us that the general public remains very angry and very unhappy with leading financial firms. And incidents like this only make that anger more self-justified and more aggressive. They certainly don't do anything to push back on the thesis that large financial institutions are not doing God's work here in America.
And people are angry, and some of those messages, some of those things that they're angry about really took shape in the Occupy Wall Street movement. You're based in New York, where one of the biggest movements is. We've heard Occupy activists talking about this kind of thing for months now, warning that what we saw could happen and some of the consequences of too big to fail banks, in general. But I'm wondering, Max, I mean, you seem somewhat optimistic about this, but you really think that people will wake up after this incident? Or, I mean, will they say this is out of control, or will business as usual just continue?
Well, I think incidents like this pick a scab with the general public, which remains pretty unhappy with the financial industry. We have a lot of embattled legislators. Remember, it's not just the presidential election that we have in November. It's also many Senate seats and all those House seats. And so people will respond to their constituencies. I think symbolically, this will be a difficult issue for the financial space, only because Jpmorgan Chase and Jamie Dimon were kind of held up as the best practices exception to the rule that financial supermarkets take undue risk with public monies. And of course, having the poster child for best practices be the latest culprit, especially to the tune of $2 billion, especially during a heating up political season and right before we discuss regulations, will push in that direction. On the other hand, I doubt this incident will change anyone's opinion, whatever way they felt about increasing regulation or about the financial sector writ large.
People are going to continue to fight for what serves their interests the best. But since this announcement last Friday, there has, of course, been a whole lot of, Monday morning quarterbacking going on about what could have prevented this, what should have prevented this. Would Dodd-Frank have stopped it? Should there be more regulation? You know your history, Max. I mean, is there anything that should have been in place to prevent this?
I'm not sure. It's a difficult thing to do here. Whenever you get large global financial institutions with literally trillions of dollars in assets under management, every time a bank makes a loan, it's also a bet. They have to bet that you'll pay in full, on time, in a currency that's viable, acceptable, valuable to them. And they have to do things and make guesses and bets about future outcomes. That's sort of the nature of the beast when it comes to banking as an industry. Once you get large, international, and somewhat risky bets being made in the form of writing loans to consumers, to governments, and to enterprises, there's going to be an effort afoot to try to lay off risk or hedge it or buy products that will vary inversely with the product risk you're taking when you write a loan. The question is, where do you draw the line between being careful to be careful with your capital and investor capital, and where do you begin to speculate in possible future outcomes on your own behalf? We don't really know where to draw that line. It's a very hotly debated subject. Jamie Dimon was a major voice against harsher regulation in that area, and depending on what happens here, what we ultimately learn exactly took place, which we have not yet in this trade, it's going to affect that debate, and it's also going to affect the public's and the legislators' patience and willingness to allow a large space for banker input into making that decision about where to draw that difficult and somewhat subjective line in the sand.
I think an important analysis there by somebody who understands all this. Fraad Wolff, a senior analyst at Greencrest Capital.